Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Datta. I'm CEO and co-founder of Bloomreach. I'm author of an upcoming book on what makes great digital experiences win big in the competitive digital marketplace. And as part of that, I'm excited to welcome you to episode 1 of this podcast around winning digital experiences. And I'm super honored to have my friend and longtime colleague, Jim Hilt, here with me today. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Raj, super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was thinking back to when we first started our adventure together, and I think it was when you were willing to come join me in a small cafe someplace in Mountain View, California, and you were back at Sears Holdings, if I remember right.
I was. We were super early from a retail standpoint in terms of exploring companies who were doing innovative things to create new and better experiences for customers. And Bloomreach came up on the radar screen, and we had, I think, a great connection. And ultimately, it sits at the cornerstone of everything I think about digital, which is very few companies are going to develop all of the capabilities that they need. And the Bloomreach, in my view, still to this day, plays a huge role in making that possible for us to not have to be expertise in everything.
If I think about your career journey from those days through to Barnes and Noble and Express, and now most recently as the president of Shutterfly Consumer, that's quite a consumer journey over some pretty different digital businesses built in different times to solve very different customer problems along the way.
I really love challenges of transforming businesses that have had a really meaningful role in the lives of their consumers, but ultimately, either through time or through just marketplace transformation, they're in need of a new way to look at things.
Yeah.
And ultimately, kind of when I think about Sears being kind of an ultimate transformation possibility in the mid 2000s, to what we're doing at Shutterfly right now, which is reimagining what photo means in the lives of consumers. Fundamentally, I always look for the experiences where change is needed, and frankly, it's desired.
Yeah. Well, let's start there. I mean, you talked about reinventing photos. If I got this right, you describe your job at Shutterfly as turning moments into memories. So tell me, if somebody were to think about the Shutterfly brand and what an incredible digital experience should feel like, perhaps does feel like, and will one day feel like, what does that look like?
What we know is that the products that our customers make every day are so critical in their lives, right? Whether it is a photo book that is for somebody's 80th birthday, or a wedding album, or it's the holiday card that creates the encapsulation of all of the things that people have done over the last year. Fundamentally, the product that our customers make really means a ton. And so they give our brand a huge amount of credit for our role in helping them do that. But what I think is the experience that you should have with us should not only marry to that amazing end product, so it should be as good, if not better, but frankly, it's about how we use technology to help people solve real problems related to that. So when we look at it today, if you think about it's something that we call photo guilt, right? You'll have tens of thousands of photos that you'll have put into your camera, now known as your phone. And in that, you don't know what to do with it. One, half of it is garbage, right? The other half is truly useful and meaningful, but you don't know how to get it all kind of figured out. And so that's an example of how do you apply technology to a real consumer problem. And so when I think about the future of Shutterfly, it isn't just about making the end product, but it's actually how in the digital experience that we're creating, we make it a lot easier for the end customer to do all of that hard work.
But you know what's so interesting about that example is, and it really comports with the research that we've done in the book, is that historically people have thought about their product. You know, to go back to your Sears days, you know, you made a refrigerator, and then the digital team's job was, okay, go figure out how to market and sell the product.
Right.
But increasingly, especially in this example that you give of people thousands and thousands of photos in their phone, the digital experience itself is the product, is the way you almost described it.
Well, if you think about all the experiences that I've gone through, I actually have fundamentally believed that from the beginning. When I was at Express, it wasn't about just what pair of pants do you wear, what blazer do you put on, or what is the dress that you're going to wear to go out. It's actually the process of thinking about, what am I trying to do? Am I going on vacation? Am I trying to impress somebody? Am I, trying to feel better about who I am?
Yeah.
Well, that whole thing isn't just about the product, it's actually what's the shopping experience.
Mhm.
Or if you go back to Barnes and Noble in the digital book business, right? I mean, the thing that I fundamentally, fell in love with in the book business is that if the digital experience of buying a book didn't comport with the excitement of actually reading the book, we were missing an opportunity. So,
Yeah.
how did you create a discovery experience in the book business that was using technology, not just to search and find,
Yeah.
but to truly immerse yourself in the world of books in a way that you would only really feel in a bookstore?
Yeah, that's awesome. And that makes so much sense because in an increasingly commoditized, highly competitive internet where products can be copied, it's a lot harder to copy experiences than it is to copy products. And so it may be the thing that stands the test of time.
Well, and I think the other thing is, if you think about the teams that build experiences versus just build capabilities, is it inherently puts them in the consumer's mindset, right? It is very hard to build technical products and technical capabilities, even if you aren't kind of customer oriented. But if you start to think about it as a total end-to-end experience, how did they come into the experience? What's happening in the middle? What's the buying process that they're going through? They're going to leave for, a couple of days and go off and think about it. Then they're going to come back and do a little bit more. In the end, it isn't kind of one moment and one linear capability. It's a totality of touch points with customers.
Yeah.
And the more we can build teams who
Mhm.
think that way, the better the product experiences are that we create, but also the better the teams.
That makes total sense. If you start to think about the experience and the products as interlaced with each other, it challenges a lot about the classical organizational dynamics of digital teams, which historically have been these siloed teams off to the side, kind of doing their own thing when e-commerce was a small detail. And here we are in 2020, where it's sort of the mainstay of how commerce is done in many ways. And that must have transformed sort of the organizational structure of a company in 2020 versus when you were early in the industry, so many years ago.
I think about that a lot. Express was a great example of the organizational transformation that could happen to really change the way you think about digital. When I got to Express, I led the e-commerce team, but it was separate from the stores business and it was separate from marketing. And frankly, those three leadership groups fundamentally were not always aligned. And it isn't that you can ever get people fully aligned. That is just going to naturally be the case in every organization. You're constantly working to bring people together. But what it was is it was creating decision-making friction. And so when you think about the ability to move fast in a dynamically changing market, fundamentally bringing digital and marketing and stores for Express together in an integrated organization, it wasn't just because I think it was a better structure for how, you could execute in front of the customer, but it frankly was a speed of decision making, right?
Yeah.
You could move through the decision making process faster and you could ultimately get teams aligned much more easily because they were all aligned to the same objectives.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so when you think about it, and I feel like I've seen digital organizations either organized like a P&L or organized across P&Ls as a capability. What's the right answer?
The good and the bad news is I don't think there's an exact right answer. I do think it's dependent on the culture of the company or the culture of the organization. In the example with Express, I think that ultimately to bring e-commerce into its own and to have it be able to shape and have the impact that it needed to have, I think you needed to bring them together because you needed to get a lot of different functions to understand the value of e-commerce, not as a threat, but as a real opportunity to go pursue
Yeah.
that benefited everybody.
Yeah.
Versus today, today, as an example, within Shutterfly, we have both been centralized and decentralized. And I actually don't think that the organizational model is actually having an impact related to how we move it forward. I think that what's having the biggest impact on Shutterfly is thinking about the customer and the types of customers that we should be talking to and creating experiences for, and ensuring that the different teams have access to that insight.
Yeah.
So I think the model is really dependent on kind of the stage of the evolution of the company relative to digital.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it seems like, in cases where the digital muscle is built, you can rely on alignment, you can rely on making sure that access to the customer is a good enough way for people to think digitally about it, sort of works. In cases where you're really at the transformational moment, maybe too much of the company is still living in an offline world, bringing it together might help really gel the teams towards, kind of a common objective. It might be a digital maturity thing, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, you can actually sometimes in consumer experiences almost be too digitally mature. So the
Mm.
example, that I think about is when I came out to the Valley and started to kind of think about teams and how you build teams. There's a lot of kind of lore that marketing isn't needed. If you build a great experience and you build an amazing product, you don't need to market it, right? And so therefore, it's not a valued capability set to the same degree that it is in other parts of the industry or the marketplace. And when I look at that, that's a place where there's such a belief in digital and there is such a belief in the technical capability that it discounts some of the other elements of the consumer experience that are equally or at least necessary to create an integrated brand opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of a continuum or some sort of kind of pendulum, and you can kind of move almost too far on one way or the other. Think about the digital pure play retailers that emerged in the Harrys and the Warby Parkers and whatnot, right? They all kind of came out of this place that if you had a great product and you had a great digital experience, that was sufficient. And what we realized is actually those retail stores actually add value in terms of giving people the ability to acquire new customers. So I think that it's about understanding all of the different ways that you can interact with and touch human beings, digitally or physically, that ultimately each company has to actually find its own unique permutation and then continuously experiment its way through that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you two things, and maybe they're interrelated or maybe they were from different moments of your career journey. What was the best sort of team that you have either been a part of or led in your experience, and why? And then I'd love to talk about what did that team do or accomplish that was so extraordinary?
In each company, the team gets to the best team,
Right.
right? So I am a huge believer that when you assemble a diverse group of opinions,
Mhm.
there's an initial phase that actually is, I won't say necessarily uncomfortable, but it doesn't always gel,
Yeah.
right? It can inherently kind of feel uncomfortable. But if you continuously focus on where is the customer and where is the opportunity, and you look for the signals that say it's over here or it's over there, and you start to get people to see that together, that fundamentally then you ultimately get to a place that they perform at their very best because you're all rooted in this very common insight. I think the second piece is that it's about a team that believes in the diversity of thinking,
Right.
right? And the diversity of opinions. And I am the first to admit I'm a pretty big personality within my teams. And one of the things that I have to work really hard on is making sure I'm hearing the people who have different points of view and I'm creating the environments to
Mhm.
get them. And what I found is that by creating that environment with that team, you actually get even more of it. And so the team gets better and better, and it continuously, evolves and reforms and focuses. But I think it's at its core, it's, do you all learn about the customer together? And then the second is, do you value the diversity of opinions in a way and in an environment that allows the best of your people to get there? And I
But
think those two dynamics are critical to me.
and that makes sense. It is a journey, and since you've come in on transformational projects of various kinds or undertakings, I'm sure that where you started and where you left it are in two very different places in terms of both the team and the state of the business. Let's pick one of those to just walk through the journey so So we get a better sense of what it really feels like to start on the ground floor when you're still groping in the dark to try to understand who the customer is and what that customer is seeking, and then maybe just take us through a little bit of that journey and how it unfolded. And we can pick any of the
Yeah.
ones that you've been a part of.
Fundamentally, I think Express is just a great example of it. It's an unfortunate kind of circumstance if you're a mall-based retailer right now. It's a tough haul. But what I would say is, this is a brand that when I walked into the brand, it actually has a core DNA that is super strong,
Mhm.
right? And it really is about how you help people look better and feel better every day and kind of get out in the world and go accomplish something. And that's really been rooted in its DNA from the beginning. But when I got there, right, you had an e-commerce team that was separated from the technology organization. There was definitely a lot of question about if the e-commerce channel was competing against stores. There was a huge amount of question about whether the role that digital marketing plays, is it to drive to the store, is it to drive to the online experience. There was a lot of discussion about what assortment has to look like, right? So if you're in a physical goods retail business, right, the breadth of your assortment is the lifeblood of what you do. But if you only see the internet as the place that is the same assortment as your biggest store, you're fundamentally limiting what the value of that endless aisle experience is. And so with that as the backdrop, what happened is a very strong and thoughtful journey for 5 years. Not just me, for sure. It's an amazing team of people, but really laid out a vision for how you grow the assortment, how you create a support experience for the stores, how you actually become a productive place for marketing to actually be delivered to, even if it's to drive to stores. And so the way I think about it is, I'm a big believer that everybody shows up with an agenda. And I actually use that word intentionally, but it's actually meant to demystify it as a negative. Each of us have a point of view, and we
Mhm.
also are motivated by certain things. But if what you can do is actually try and align all of those motivations to realize that actually e-commerce plus great marketing plus great in-store experiences plus amazing touch points with our customer service teams, et cetera, plus an amazing assortment that can be delivered in store or online. If you can actually help people see that, the opportunity then becomes bigger. And
Mhm.
what you do is you iteratively develop to it. So from a technology and product standpoint, it's super easy to talk about. You're just agile. We have a 2-week scrum, team. We have a team that goes out and delivers in 2-week iterations, and they continuously test and learn and all of those things. But to do that across a physical environment, to do that in a retail space with technology at the core of it, that's really hard to do. And what I would say is, over 5 years, it was, how do we bring the structure together? How do we bring the technology into the store so they can see the benefit from it? How do we listen to what
Mhm.
the store teams are actually experiencing? Because it isn't all, tulips and roses when you walk in, and we've implemented all of these new tools. And I think we made huge progress
Yeah.
because we just iteratively kept people focused on bringing them all together was going to create a much better customer experience.
And it sounds like the galvanizing thing was that end customer experience. Ultimately, whether you were in the store, or you were in marketing, or you were in e-commerce, you could see what that end customer experience could feel like if there was collaboration across all three and all, these various functions coming together.
Well, it was really interesting, and I think it's true in a lot of brands. Sometimes it's not only seeing what the possibility is, it's seeing what life could be like without it. And so a decent amount of what we had to paint was the picture of, well, but if we don't do this, this is what's happening,
And is that
right? If
competitive threats, or is that just
I
crappy?
mean, I think it's a little bit of both. One, I think it's pretty easy to you'll always be able to find somebody who, in a particular segment of what you're doing, is more advanced, right? Or could be more advanced, or has found this one little niche that you're like, oh my gosh, I need to do this, right? Interactive fitting room mirrors is a great example. But the point is that the way I think about it is more from a customer standpoint, right? A customer comes into your store, you don't have the size that they need, and you don't have a mobile experience where they could order it right now. That customer misses out on an opportunity to put Express on their body, right? That's, I think, a great example of what would it look like if you don't. At Shutterfly, what we talk about are buyers and creators. So a photo book is a creator's like playground, right? They spend hours and hours and they do amazing things and they pick out the photos and they talk to all of the people and they assemble all of it and they make lots of modifications to it. But what we're missing when we make it complex out of a desire to create lots of features is we're missing all sorts of people, people like me, who get intimidated by that,
Yeah.
right? So again, it's less, am I worried about, other photo book providers, or am I worried about other photo, storage creators? What I'm worried about is that I've got a whole bunch of consumers who would love photo books, but because we don't do something, they're missing out, right?
Mhm.
So painting a picture of what it looks like by not having it.
Mhm. Well, so you raise a really interesting point, which is, classically you think of consumers as, well, these are my customers, maybe there's segments of them, but you just described two fundamentally different personas, the creator and the consumer, of the same thing. Do you literally say, we're building two completely different experiences, one for A and one for B, and we're going to, either equally or somehow differentially prioritize across both?
That's the challenge. I wish it was one, that clear cut, and two, I wish the decision making on it could be that easy, right? It's actually, the fundamental challenge that we have is how do you think about a platform that can be that modular, right?
Yeah.
That can actually both simultaneously support the creator, and photo book is such a good example, or support the buyer simultaneously. And so we talk about ease of use, right?
Mhm.
And ease of use doesn't always mean simple. And so now our objective is how do we make the photo book experience, as an example, more intelligent? So we put photos in it in a pre-populated way, in a way that we really have derived that we can create it instantaneously. So as an example, in the fourth quarter of this year, we will launch a photo book capability where you can have a photo book in 5 seconds, and we believe it will be very easily click and buy publishable.
Okay.
Now, that same experience can also be given to you, and if you want to embellish it, you want to put stickers in it, you want to put all sorts of kind of design modifications to it, we make it easy for you to do that. And
Mhm.
so where I'm really focused is, as we simplify the experience, it's the ability for you to progressively access more capability depending on how much you want to spend time doing it.
Yeah. It's the Apple paradigm of, there's the advanced button if you really want to understand it, but you should be able to figure out how to load your computer or run an app with a couple of clicks. The
That
equivalent
is
in some
That
sense.
is exactly it. It's how do we, again, I'm going to go back to, I think about me. Like, I am in this business, I am passionate about it, but I still need the photo book to be kind of made for me because I don't have the patience for it. And then on the other hand, I have, people in my life who literally will spend, that is what they will do for their weekends. And it's
Yeah.
really fun for them. We want to support both of them.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. I mean, in some sense, it's so tempting to just say, well, which one are you? Are you just serving the more advanced folks, or are you serving, simplicity, the kind of name of the game? But the reality is, so many, as human beings, we're just much more complicated than that. And if you want to
Well,
try to, you got to break up the experience in some fashion,
Well, I
progressively.
mean, the other part of it, right, is that when you make it easier for people who just want to get in and out, you're actually making it easier for the people who want to do a lot more. And so
Mhm.
then, as out of the pure economics of a business, my goal is that I'm going to get you to make more of those photo books. So someone who used to spend a ton of time and ton of effort, and they would buy 4 photo books a year, if I can make it radically easier, but still give you all of the ability to play and customize and whatnot, can I get 6? Can I get 7? And that radically changes the economics of simplicity, because I'm both tapping into a new market, right, a new audience of people, but simultaneously, I potentially can get more out of the existing people who they've learned how to do it, even if we can make it better for them.
Yeah. Well, so as you're defining these kinds of experiences, and maybe it's a more general question than that, when you come into any one of these roles, what are the critical roles for your team when you look at wanting to make sure that you have the best digital team to execute this vision? What are the key roles that you would say we got to have great people with these capabilities?
If you think about it from my vantage point, my entire career has been, outside of kind of when I was in pure technology at IBM, has been built on the fact that we sell a physical product.
Yeah.
right? So when you sell a physical product, the fundamental underpinning is you better have somebody who's really good at determining what those underlying physical products should be. So the merchant and design team is the critical key player, because if you start from a good base, you win. I think the second place that I look for is, frankly, again, and what's going to be surprising is it's not in the digital team right away. It's, do I have a great kind of supply chain and manufacturing team? Because here's what I think about. If I build an amazing experience and you can build a digital marketing engine or a marketing engine that drives demand for this product, the number one thing that will make the whole thing collapse is the inability to deliver it in a way that meets the customer's needs. So if I put those aside, right, those are core to like what you need in a physical product business as a must have. I then step back and I think that the product management leadership is just without a doubt critical. And then the interaction design is critical to what we do.
Yeah.
And I really think about interaction design in a much broader way. And frankly, we think about product management in a much broader way. One of the things that I've worked really hard to abolish is the idea that there's like marketing technology and a marketing function, and then there's this kind of digital experience and digital technology that is the website of Shutterfly.com and the app experience and the mobile web and all of those things. Because in the end, again, I'm going to go back to the Express days, which is every touch point that you have with a Shutterfly customer is the touch point that that customer has.
Yeah.
And if they're not integrated and they're not thought through in that kind of consistent way, you miss the mark, right? So for me, product management cuts across the totality of all of the customer touch points, and so does interaction design. And what that then does is enables marketers to do great work.
So does that mean that the product management team is equally responsible for the email that's sent out or the display in some physical location as they are for what the website looks like?
They are responsible for defining how it will happen and what the tools and capabilities and experiences are. The marketing team is the driver of that operationally, and also they're the ones feeding into that product management team and interaction design team the insight that's needed to continuously evolve. What I always think about is, as a marketer, having been one, is that what I want is all of the tools and the experiences and the capabilities to almost be seamless to me. And what I want to go do is know how to communicate and what to communicate and how can I get more refined. And so how do we bring those disciplines together in a much more cohesive and close way? And I think the gap in the market historically has been that product management has almost always, at least within kind of retail digital, has always been kind of start and stop at the website and the app.
Yeah.
Right. And the marketing team drives how to define the marketing experiences and marketing technology. And you end up in this place where you're like, even with amazing teams that are well intentioned, you end up with disjointed customer experiences that are sub-optimized.
It's so interesting that you say that, because there's been this whole trend around what people have been calling product-led growth, with this idea that if you build the product thinking about its distribution to begin with, then probably what you will wind up spending later on sales, marketing, service capabilities will end up being a lot less, because you've designed it up front that the product has to play a role in its own distribution. And that's a little bit what you're describing, right? Right. I mean, arguably tools like Slack are examples of that, where, in completely other domains where its distribution is built into the product. You're kind of saying the same thing could be applied in digital, which is the experience doesn't stop at the gates of the website or the app. It goes out to all the consumer touch points. And that then forces the product management team to define an end-to-end experience that should mean that demand acquisition and conversion both improve.
Well, I mean, the way I think about it, right, is, again, if you go back to the historical delineations, like the product management function has historically kind of looked at marketing as kind of something that they don't need. If you build an amazing product, people will come, right? Or the distribution will be built into the product. Well, you know what that is? That's marketing.
Right.
So the discipline and the skill set and the expertise that traditional marketers have, what you're doing is you're just saying that needs to be inside the thinking of product management. And so I have this belief that the more you collapse them, the more they become part of one another. But what I actually think it does is, if they are truly honest with each other, right, from a discipline standpoint, you will stop saying, I don't need marketing.
Yeah,
You will actually say marketing is embedded in how I think about how to build product,
that's
right?
great.
Because the classic case of marketing is how do you go and source demand and or create demand.
That makes sense. Well, Jim, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for spending this time. It's been fun to talk about all these topics, and thanks so much for being on the program.
Absolutely. It was great to catch up with you.
Thanks for joining us today.